The Tactical Operations Center at FOB Diamondback smelled like stale coffee and printer toner, packed wall-to-wall with bodies in multicam and desert tan. 243 operators, Navy SEALs from 6 different platoons, plus support personnel, filled every chair, leaned against every wall, their eyes fixed on the mission brief projected across the front screen. Outside Mosul, Iraq, in the summer of 2016, this was the largest coordinated strike the task force had run all deployment. High-value ISIS command targets. 3 simultaneous breach points into the old city. The kind of operation that could shift the momentum of the entire counteroffensive. Staff Sergeant Maya Reeves stood at the back of the room, tablet in hand, watching mission roles get assigned one by one. Marine Scout Sniper, attached to the SEAL Task Force for precision overwatch and logistics support. On paper, her role was critical. In practice, she'd learned over the past 4 months that attached meant exactly what it sounded like. Connected, but never fully integrated. She was the only woman in the room, a reality that hadn't stopped feeling heavy since the day she'd arrived. The SEAL sniper team leads were getting their positions now. Overwatch Building Alpha, northeast corner, 800 meters from the primary breach point. Overwatch Building Bravo, rooftop with clean sight lines into the compound's courtyard. High ground positions with maximum tactical value. The kind of spots Maya had been trained to identify and exploit since her first day at Marine Scout Sniper School. She'd graduated 3rd in her class. That was 4 years and 2 combat deployments ago, but the doubt in people's eyes never seemed to update with her record. The operations officer's voice cut through the room. Reeves, you'll handle rear security and equipment staging at the staging area. Make sure the QRF is what they need if we call them forward. Rear security. Equipment staging. Translation, stay out of the way. Maya's jaw tightened, but she kept her face neutral. She'd learned that much, at least. Reacting only confirmed what they already suspected, that she was too emotional, too sensitive, not built for this world. Her tablet screen glowed with the satellite imagery she'd been studying for the past 2 weeks, annotated with notes and range calculations. She'd identified 3 vantage points the brief hadn't mentioned, including a 4-story structure with clean line of sight into the entire eastern approach. It was tactically significant, the kind of detail that could matter if the mission went sideways. She raised her hand, waiting for acknowledgement. The operations officer glanced her way, nodded. So, I've been running analysis on the satellite feeds, and there's a structure here. She started to gesture toward the map, but a voice from the middle of the room cut her off. We've got it covered, Staff Sergeant. The SEAL sniper team leader, a lieutenant commander with a mustache and the kind of casual authority that comes from 100 missions, didn't even look her direction. We've walked every angle. Appreciate the input. The dismissal was polite, professional, even. That somehow made it worse. A younger SEAL a few rows ahead leaned toward his buddy, voice low but not low enough. Diversity attachments. Got to check those boxes, right? Laughter rippled through the nearby operators. Not loud, not cruel, just the easy camaraderie of men who'd never had to prove they belonged in a room. The mission commander at the front didn't intervene, didn't even pause in his brief. Maya felt the heat crawl up her neck, the familiar sting of being dismissed not for what she'd done, but for what she represented in their minds. A quota, a political gesture, a box checked on someone's spreadsheet back at headquarters. She lowered her tablet and said nothing. There was nothing to say. The brief continued, assignments finalized, and the room began to empty as platoons moved toward their pre-mission rehearsals. Maya stayed at the back, watching them file out, loud, confident, ready. She'd been ready for weeks. But ready didn't matter if no one trusted you to step up when it counted. The last operators left the TOC, and the air felt heavier in the silence. Maya looked down at her tablet one more time, at the vantage point no one wanted to hear about, and wondered how badly things would have to go wrong before anyone reconsidered what she was capable of. Maya headed back to her quarters, a plywood box with a cot and a wall locker in the corner of the FOB's transient housing area. The SEALs had their own compound on the other side of the base, better facilities, dedicated armory, their own chow hall. She'd been inside it exactly twice in 4 months, both times to deliver equipment requisitions. The message was clear enough. Your support staff, not one of us. She set her tablet down and pulled her rifle case from beneath the cot. The M40A6 inside had been with her longer than most friendships. 3 deployments, 2 continents, more confirmed kills than she kept count of anymore. The rifle was an extension of her will, and she treated it with the kind of reverence some people reserve for religion. What the SEALs in that briefing room didn't know, what they'd never asked, was that Staff Sergeant Maya Reeves had graduated 3rd overall in her Marine Scout sniper class at Camp Pendleton. Not 3rd among women. 3rd, period. Out of 43 candidates who started the course, only 19 finished. She'd been one of 4 women to ever complete the pipeline, and the only one currently deployed in a combat zone. The instructors had called her a natural. Her classmates had called her something else, usually behind her back, sometimes to her face, but none of them could argue with her scores. Syria, 2014. Her first deployment. She'd made a confirmed kill at 1,420 meters on an ISIS mortar team that had been shelling a refugee camp. The wind had been gusting, the heat mirage brutal, but the shot had been clean. The mortars went silent. Civilians stopped dying. Her platoon commander had put her in for a Navy Cross. The recommendation had been quietly downgraded to a Navy and Marine Corps Commendation Medal after what they called an administrative review. No explanation given, but Maya understood the subtext. Heroism looked a certain way in the Corps, and a woman behind a rifle complicated the narrative they wanted to tell. So the paperwork got revised, the medal got downgraded, and the message was clear. You can do the work, but don't expect the credit. That was 2 years ago. She deployed again to Iraq in 2015, then back to Mosul in 2016. Each time, the cycle repeated. Prove yourself, earn respect from the people who work directly with you, then rotate to a new unit and start over. Every mission was a re-audition. Every shot carried the weight of every woman who'd come before her and every one who'd come after. One mistake, and she'd confirm every bias. Perfect performance earned her silence, maybe a nod. Never advancement, never trust beyond the bare minimum. The Marine Corps had needed embedded precision assets for the SEAL task force, but policy still barred women from officially joining SEAL ground combat teams. So they created this bureaucratic gray zone, attached for support, present but not integrated, technically part of the mission but always at arm's length. She existed in the gap between what the mission required and what the regulations allowed. Maya opened the rifle case and began her ritual, cleaning the bore with methodical precision, running patches through until they came out white, checking the scope's 0 against her data book, comparing come-ups and windage adjustments from her last confirmed shots, loading hand-selected rounds, federal gold medal match, 175 grain, each cartridge inspected for imperfections before it went into the magazine. Her hands moved with the kind of automatic precision that came from repetition, but her mind stayed sharp, calculating, preparing. Across the room, Lance Corporal Hendricks, a younger Marine sniper also attached to the task force, watched her work. He'd been with her on 3 missions, seen her put rounds through targets at distances that made his hands sweat just thinking about them. He respected her in the way you respect someone whose skill is undeniable, the kind of respect that doesn't require words. But he also knew better than to defend her publicly. The social cost was too high. In the chow hall, when other Marines made jokes, Hendrick stayed quiet. In the TOC, when her input got dismissed, he kept his head down. It wasn't courage he lacked. He'd proven that under fire. It was the willingness to make himself a target alongside her, and Maya didn't blame him for that. This was her fight to navigate, not his. She finished prepping her rifle and locked it back in the case. Tomorrow, she'd be staged 2 kilometers from the action, handling rear security while SEAL snipers took the position she'd identified weeks ago. The world saw a diversity hire filling a quota. The truth was a professional who'd made shots that would haunt most operators in their sleep. But Maya had learned the hard way that arguing didn't change minds. Demanding recognition didn't earn respect. In this world, words meant nothing. Only the work mattered. Only the shot counted. So she stayed ready, stayed sharp, and waited for the moment when someone would need what only she could deliver. Because that moment always came eventually. The question was whether they'd let her take it when it did. 16 hours later, Maya was on a rooftop 2 kilometers from the old city, watching the mission unfold through her rifle scope. The sky was still dark, that pre-dawn gray where the world exists in shades of thermal green through night vision. Her position was exactly what the operations officer had assigned. Security at the staging area, far from the breach points, far from the action. A place to keep her occupied and out of the way. The radio traffic had been cleaned for the first 20 minutes. Breach Team Alpha reported successful entry into the target compound's northern approach. Breach Team Bravo pushed through the western wall with controlled explosives, loud but effective. Everything was moving according to plan, the kind of smooth operation that looked effortless because of the hours of rehearsal behind it. Then Breach Team Charlie hit the eastern corridor, and the city exploded. IED. IED. Building collapse. We've got men trapped. The radio transmission cut off into static, then chaos. Maya's scope was trained on the distant structure, too far to see details but close enough to see the dust cloud rising from what used to be a 3-story building. The explosion had been perfectly timed, perfectly placed. Not random. Pre-positioned. Charlie 1, report. We're pinned. Corridor collapsed. 40 personnel trapped in the kill zone, taking fire from multiple positions. Through her scope, Maya watched muzzle flashes erupt from surrounding buildings, coordinated, overlapping fields of fire. ISIS fighters appeared in windows, on rooftops, behind reinforced positions that had clearly been prepared in advance. This wasn't a random firefight. This was an ambush, and the SEALs had walked straight into it. The other SEAL elements moved to support, exactly as they'd been trained to do. Alpha and Bravo platoons pushed toward Charlie's position, trying to create suppression and an extraction corridor. Within seconds, they were taking fire too, RPGs streaking across the narrow streets, automatic weapons fire pouring down from elevated positions. The 6-block grid of Mosul's old city had become a meat grinder, and 240 American operators were caught in the teeth of it. Maya's radio exploded with overlapping transmissions. Casualty reports. Ammunition status. Maneuver attempts that failed as soon as they started. The calm, professional tone of SEAL operators under fire. But beneath it she could hear the strain, the urgency, the reality that men were dying and the situation was deteriorating fast. Gunship. We need fire support on the 4-story structure, eastern position. Negative. Your position is too close. Cannon fire risks collapsing the building on top of Charlie 1. We cannot engage. The AC-130 overhead had the firepower to level entire city blocks, but the trapped SEAL platoon was directly beneath unstable rubble. One wrong vibration, one piece of debris shifted by a 105mm round, and the collapse would kill everyone still inside. The pilots knew it. Command knew it. And ISIS knew it too, which was exactly why they'd set the trap that way. QRF, what's your ETA? 20 minutes out. 20 minutes. Maya watched through her scope as tracer rounds cut through the darkness, as another RPG slammed into a wall near Alpha Platoon's position. 20 minutes was a lifetime in a firefight like this. Men could bleed out in 5. 2 KIA confirmed, 8 wounded. We need medevac, now. Maya's jaw clenched. She keyed her radio, keeping her voice calm and professional. TOC, this is Reeves. I have elevation and line of sight to the eastern sector. Request permission to displace to Overwatch position Eagle. That was the vantage point she'd identified in her analysis, the 4-story structure with clear sight lines into the entire ambush zone. The position no one had wanted to hear about in the briefing. The response came back almost immediately. Negative, Reeves. Stay at your post. We're handling it. She watched command try every conventional solution. Ground teams attempted to reposition, but every movement drew coordinated fire from multiple directions. Someone called for precision drone strikes. Denied, too much risk of collateral damage in the densely packed civilian structures. Smoke grenades went out to cover an extraction attempt, but the wind was wrong, blowing the cover away before anyone could move. Through her scope's powerful magnification, Maya scanned the enemy positions systematically, reading the battlefield the way she'd been trained to do. The ISIS fighters weren't random. Their fire was disciplined, coordinated, reactive to every SEAL movement. Someone was directing them in real time, and she knew exactly where to look for command elements in urban combat. High ground, protected position, clear view of the battlefield. She found him on the top floor of the 4-story building, the same structure the gunship couldn't engage without risking the trapped Americans below. A figure moving between windows, holding what looked like a radio in one hand, gesturing with the other. Every time the SEALs tried to maneuver, she watched him speak into the radio, and seconds later ISIS fighters would shift to block the movement. He was orchestrating the entire ambush, repositioning his fighters to counter every American attempt at extraction. A tactical mastermind turning a chaotic firefight into a calculated execution. Take him out, and the enemy coordination would collapse. The fighters would lose their eyes, their voice, their central command. They'd revert to independent fire, lose their overlapping coverage, create gaps the SEALs could exploit. It was the tactical keystone holding the entire ambush together. Maya keyed her radio again. TOC, I have visual on enemy command element. Top floor, 4-story structure, eastern sector. Is directing their entire defensive posture. Copy that, Reeves. We're working the problem. But they weren't working her problem. They were cycling through options that couldn't work. Ground maneuvers into prepared kill zones, air assets that couldn't engage, reinforcements that were still 15 minutes out. And every minute they spent working conventional problems, more Americans were bleeding. Medevac request, urgent surgical. We've got a corpsman down. The radio traffic was getting desperate now, the professional calm cracking at the edges. Maya's hands tightened on her rifle, her eyes locked on the ISIS commander through her scope. She could see the solution. She could deliver it. But she was 2 kilometers away, locked in a position no one trusted her to leave, watching men die while command dismissed the one option they hadn't tried. The contrast was unbearable. In the TOC, voices raised in urgent coordination, trying to manage a crisis spiraling beyond control. On her rooftop, silence and clarity, a single shot that could change everything. Loud, failing solutions versus the quiet answer no one wanted to hear. Another casualty report crackled over the radio. 3 KIA now, 12 wounded. The numbers were climbing, and the quick reaction force was still 10 minutes out. Maya's finger rested along the side of her rifle, not on the trigger. Not yet. She watched the ISIS commander move between windows, coordinating his fighters with the kind of tactical competence that came from training and experience. He thought he was untouchable up there, beyond the range of the Americans trapped in his kill zone. He was right about that, but he hadn't accounted for someone 2 kilometers away who'd been making impossible shots since before he'd ever picked up a rifle. The question wasn't whether she could make the shot. The question was whether anyone would let her try before it was too late. In the TOC at FOB Diamondback, the SEAL mission commander stood over a digital map table, his staff clustered around him in controlled crisis mode. The screen showed drone feed from multiple angles, thermal imaging of the ambush zone, real-time position markers for every American element now pinned across 6 blocks of Mosul's old city. Options were being called out, evaluated, discarded. Air support, denied, too close to friendlies. Ground maneuver, every route was covered by overlapping fire. Smoke and suppression, ineffective in the urban terrain and wind conditions. The QRF was now 12 minutes out, and intelligence reports were coming in that ISIS reinforcements were moving toward the fight from the south. Men were dying while command cycled through solutions that wouldn't work. The radio net crackled with a new voice, the SEAL element commander on the ground, his tone clipped and urgent. All Overwatch elements. We need eyes on enemy command. Anyone have visual on the top floor, northwest structure? We need that position neutralized now. Maya's heart rate kicked up. That was her target. The ISIS commander she'd been tracking for the past 5 minutes. The one coordinating every enemy movement like a conductor leading an orchestra of violence. She keyed her radio immediately. TOC, this is Reeves. I have positive visual on enemy command element, top floor of the 4-story structure. I can confirm his directing tactical movements via radio. There was a pause on the net, just a beat too long. Then, Reeves, what's your distance to target? She'd already done the math twice, checking it against her range card and data book. 1,850 meters. Wind gusting 8 to 12 knots from the west. Heat mirage present. Target is mobile and partially concealed behind window frames. Another voice cut in. One of the SEAL snipers positioned closer to the fight, probably the team lead from Overwatch Bravo. I don't have the angle from here. Buildings are blocking my line of sight. But that's an extreme range shot, even in perfect conditions. The implication hung in the air like smoke. And especially for you. Maya's jaw tightened. She knew exactly what that comment meant. 1,850 meters wasn't just long range. It was at the ragged edge of what was technically possible with the M40A6 platform. World-class military snipers trained their entire careers and might attempt that shot once or twice in combat. The variables were stacked against success. Variable wind in an urban heat canyon, a moving target, partial concealment, and a narrow sight window between buildings. It was the kind of shot that got written up in after-action reviews and studied in advanced courses. The kind nobody expected you to make under pressure, especially if they'd already decided you didn't belong. The mission commander's voice came back, measured and final. Reeves, hold position. We're working alternate solutions. Sir, with respect, there are no alternate solutions. Maya kept her voice professional, but the urgency bled through. That commander is the linchpin. His reactive tasking his fighters to every movement we make. Take him out, and their coordination collapses. Understood. Stand by. Stand by. The two words that meant we've heard you and we're ignoring you. Maya watched through her scope as the ISIS commander moved between windows again, hand signals directing a team to reposition toward Alpha Platoon's attempted flanking maneuver. He was good, disciplined, trained, tactically sound. Every time a drone passed overhead, he pulled back from the windows, using the building's interior shadows to mask his thermal signature. He knew American capabilities, and he was staying just outside them, untouchable at 800 meters from the nearest SEAL sniper position, protected by geometry and distance. But he hadn't accounted for her. The radio erupted again. Coleman down. We've got a Coleman hit while treating wounded. Urgent surgical. We need medevac now. Maya's hands tightened on her rifle. A Coleman. The medic who ran toward gunfire while everyone else ran away, who treated wounded under fire, who gave SEALs a chance to make it home. And now he was down, bleeding out in a kill zone while command worked through their flowcharts and decision matrices. She keyed her radio one more time, keeping her voice steady despite the adrenaline screaming through her system. TOC, I have the shot. Request permission to engage. The response was immediate and ice-cold. Negative, Reeves. Hold your position and wait for the QRF. Through her scope, Maya watched ISIS fighters dragging a PKM heavy machine gun into position on a second-floor window, the long belt of ammunition glinting in the early morning light. They weren't content to pin the Americans down anymore. They were preparing to finish the job, to turn suppressing fire into an execution. The trapped SEALs had maybe 3 minutes before that gun started talking, and once it did, the casualties would multiply. 12 minutes until the QRF arrived. 3 minutes until the machine gun opened up. The math was simple and brutal. Maya's mind raced through the calculation one more time, not because she needed to check her numbers, but because she needed to be absolutely certain. 1,850 meters. Bullet drop of approximately 53 feet. Wind drift of 3 to 4 feet depending on gusts. Heat mirage creating optical distortion. A moving target with a 2-second window of exposure every 40 to 50 seconds. The M40A6 was capable of the shot, barely, but only in the hands of someone who understood the physics at an instinctive level, who trained thousands of hours to read wind and mirage, who could control their breathing and heartbeat and muscle tension to deliver one perfect trigger press. She'd made shots like this before. Syria, 2014. Iraq, 2015. Shots that got buried in classified after-action reports and downgraded medal recommendations. Shots that proved her capability to everyone except the people making decisions about where she belonged. This was the moment she'd been preparing for since the day she'd raised her hand and said she wanted to be a sniper. Not the easy shots at 400 meters with perfect conditions. The impossible ones. The ones where failure meant Americans died and success meant maybe, just maybe, someone would finally see her for what she actually was. But she'd spent her entire career following orders, proving she could fit in, never making waves. The Marine Corps had taught her that discipline was the foundation of everything, that you trusted your chain of command, executed your assigned role, and didn't freelance even when you thought you knew better. Every woman who'd come before her in combat roles had walked that same tightrope. Be aggressive but not insubordinate. Be capable but not threatening. Prove yourself without ever making the men around you feel diminished. Through her scope, she watched the ISIS commander gesture toward the machine gun position, coordinating fields of fire. Then she listened to another casualty report crackle over the radio. 4 KIA now, 15 wounded. She thought about the Navy Cross recommendation that became a handshake and a commendation medal, about the briefing room where her analysis was dismissed, about the 1,000 small cuts of being doubted despite the evidence of her record. And then she thought about the 240 men pinned down in that kill zone who didn't care about politics or gender or bureaucratic risk calculations. They just wanted to survive the next 3 minutes. They just wanted to go home to their families. They deserved someone who'd take the shot when it mattered, orders or not. Her hands moved to her rifle, settling into the familiar grip. Hendricks, her spotter, looked over at her from his position 3 feet away. His eyes asked the question his mouth didn't. Are you really going to do this? Maya's answer was in the way she adjusted her scope's elevation knob, dialing in the correction for 1,850 meters. Sometimes the only way to prove you belong is to do the thing they said you couldn't. Sometimes orders and conscience collide, and you have to choose which one you can live with. She chose the shot. Maya didn't ask for permission again. She shifted position on the rooftop, moving to a reinforced corner where a low concrete wall provided a more stable platform and a fractionally better angle through the urban canyon. Her body moved with practiced efficiency, no wasted motion, no hesitation. She made her choice the moment her hands touched the rifle. Hendricks watched her reposition, his eyes moving from her to the distant target zone and back again. For a long moment, he didn't move. Then he made his own choice. He pulled out his spotting scope, adjusted the tripod, and settled in beside her. No words exchanged. He'd seen her shoot, knew what she was capable of, and right now that mattered more than career consequences or social dynamics. Sometimes you had to decide what kind of Marine you wanted to be when it counted. Maya settled into her shooting position, her body becoming an extension of the rifle rather than something separate from it. Left hand supporting the forestock, right hand on the grip, cheek weld solid against the stock. I aligned perfectly with the scope. Her breathing slowed automatically, years of training overriding the adrenaline. Heart rate dropped from combat ready to surgical precision. The chaos of the radio traffic faded into background noise. The world narrowed to the circle of glass in front of her eye. Through the scope's lens, 1,850 meters away, the ISIS commander moved between windows on the top floor. She could see him clearly now in the growing dawn light. Olive-drab jacket, dark beard, radio in his left hand. He gestured with his right hand toward positions below, directing his fighters with the confidence of someone who believed he was beyond reach. Hendricks had his spotting scope locked on the same target, feeding her data in a low whisper. Wind 10 knots, gusting west-northwest. Mirage is moving left to right. Target is mobile, establishing a pattern every 40 to 50 seconds. You've got maybe a 2-second window when he checks the western sector. Maya's mind processed the information not through conscious calculation, but through muscle memory built from 1,000 hours on the range and 100 shots under real-world conditions. At 1,850 meters, the .308 round would drop over 50 feet from the point of aim, following a ballistic arc that looked more like artillery than direct fire. The wind would push the bullet several feet laterally. The heat mirage rising from Mosul's sun-baked structures would create optical distortion, making the target appear shifted from where it actually was. A moving target with partial concealment meant she needed to time the shot for the instant he was fully exposed and momentarily stationary. The slightest error would mean a miss, a fraction of a degree in her scope adjustment, a twitch of muscle during trigger press, a miscalculation of air density in the urban heat canyon. Otherwise, she could hit a civilian structure, give away her position, and achieve nothing except confirming every doubt anyone had ever had about whether she belonged here. She adjusted her scope's elevation and windage turrets, dialing in corrections that would look impossible written on paper. The clicks felt solid under her fingers, each one representing a precise angular adjustment. Her finger moved to the trigger, resting along the curve without applying pressure yet. Not yet. Through the scope, the ISIS commander disappeared from the window, moving deeper into the building. Maya waited, her breathing controlled, her body motionless. He reappeared after 30 seconds, moving too quickly, stepping past the window frame without pausing. Not yet. She waited through another cycle, her breathing in perfect rhythm. Inhale, exhale, natural pause, repeat. Somewhere in the background, a voice on the radio was screaming for a Coleman, another SEAL down, another life hanging in the balance. The commander moved to the window again. This time he paused, stepping forward to survey his kill zone below. 3 seconds instead of his usual 2. A moment of battlefield arrogance. The confidence of a tactician who'd orchestrated a perfect ambush and now wanted to observe his work. He thought he was untouchable up there, beyond the reach of the Americans trapped in his carefully designed kill zone. Maya's breathing stopped at the natural pause between exhale and inhale, the moment when the body is most still. Her finger applied smooth, steady pressure to the trigger. No jerking, no anticipation, just consistent rearward motion until the sear released and the firing pin struck the primer. The rifle roared. The recoil was massive. The M40A6 kicked like a mule at full power, but her body absorbed it perfectly, shoulder and core muscles controlling the rifle's violent rearward motion. The muzzle blast was deafening even with hearing protection. Dust kicked up around her position from the overpressure. For 2.3 seconds, the bullet flew. It crossed neighborhoods, flew over buildings that had stood for centuries and others reduced to rubble by years of war. It fought wind that tried to push it off course, gravity that pulled it toward Earth, heat currents that wanted to destabilize its flight. The 175-grain projectile spun at thousands of rotations per minute, its boat-tail design slicing through air with brutal efficiency. It traveled faster than the speed of sound, faster than the human eye could track, a tiny piece of copper-jacketed lead carrying the weight of 240 American lives on its trajectory. In the TOC, someone was yelling over the radio. "Reeves, ceasefire." I said ceasefire. Hendricks had his spotting scope locked on the target. His breathing stopped, waiting. Maya stayed frozen in her shooting position. I still pressed to her scope, watching. The bullet found him. Through the high-powered magnification, Maya watched the ISIS commander's head snap back. Not Hollywood dramatic, no theatrical fall. Just there 1 second and gone the next, erased from the fight as cleanly as flipping a switch. One moment he was directing an ambush that was killing Americans. The next moment he was a casualty statistic, dead before his body hit the floor. For 5 seconds, nothing changed on the battlefield. The ISIS fighters kept firing, kept suppressing, following the last orders they'd received. Then the absence of new orders started to register. The voice on their radios had gone silent. The hand signals from the command position had stopped. Their coordination, precise and deadly for the past 30 minutes, began to fracture. Disciplined suppressive fire became sporadic bursts. Fighters glanced toward the command building, waiting for direction that wouldn't come. Some pulled back from their positions, uncertain. Others held their ground, but their fire lost its tactical purpose, shooting at nothing, wasting ammunition. The confusion spread like a virus through their ranks. They didn't know where the shot had come from. At 1,850 meters, the sound of the rifle report was distorted by urban acoustics, seeming to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. The SEAL elements on the ground recognized the shift immediately. These were operators who'd spent careers reading battlefield dynamics, and they knew opportunity when they saw it. Suppressing fire increased from American positions. Maneuver teams that had been pinned down for 30 minutes started moving, exploiting the gaps in enemy coverage. The trap platoon began extracting their wounded under cover, finally able to move without coordinated fire tearing them apart. In the TOC, someone was reviewing drone footage, rewinding it, watching the impossible shot play out on thermal imaging. A voice cut through the chaos on the command net, sharp with confusion and something that might have been, "Oh, who made that shot? Who the hell had that shot?" Hendricks keyed his radio before Maya could stop him, his voice steady and clear. "Reeves, Staff Sergeant Reeves, 1,850 meters. Silence on the net. Complete, absolute silence. Not disbelief. The drone footage didn't lie. The thermal imaging didn't lie. The sudden collapse of enemy coordination didn't lie. But stunned recognition of what had just happened, of who had just pulled them back from the edge of a massacre. The SEAL mission commander's voice came back over the radio, and every trace of the earlier patronizing tone was gone, stripped away and replaced with the kind of respect that only comes from witnessing something extraordinary. "Copy that. Hell of a shot, Reeves. Hell of a shot." The fight turned after that. Within 8 minutes, the QRF arrived to find the ambush already broken, enemy fighters retreating or surrendering, the tactical initiative completely reversed. The SEALs extracted with their wounded, moving through corridors that had been death traps minutes before. The final casualty count came through as the last operators reached the extraction point. 3 KIA, 15 wounded. Devastating numbers, but a fraction of what it could have been. What it would have been if the ambush had continued for another 10 minutes. A precision drone made a final pass over the 4-story building, confirming what Maya already knew. The ISIS commander lay dead on the top floor, surrounded by his radio equipment and tactical maps. One shot, surgically precise, more effective than any airstrike could have been. No collateral damage, no civilian casualties, just the removal of the single point of failure in the enemy's command structure. Maya saved her weapon with hands that didn't shake, muscle memory taking over as she cleared the chamber and engaged the safety. She'd spent the last 3 minutes barely breathing, her entire being focused on the scope and the target and the impossible mathematics of making a bullet do something that shouldn't be possible. Now it was over, and her body was reminding her that she was human, that adrenaline had a cost, that what she'd just done would take time to fully process. But her hands didn't shake. They never did after a shot. This was what she'd trained for, what she'd spent 4 years and 3 deployments preparing to deliver. The brief had dismissed her. Command had sidelined her. The jokes had written her off as a diversity hire, a box checked on someone's bureaucratic checklist. And she'd just proven, in the most undeniable way possible, exactly what she was capable of when someone finally gave her the chance, or when she took it herself. The emotional reversal was complete. The woman they wouldn't let speak in the briefing room had just made the shot that saved an entire operation. Not through luck, not through accident, not because the situation was easy. Through pure, undeniable skill at the ragged edge of what was physically possible. Hendricks looked over at her, something like wonder in his eyes. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. They both knew what had just happened, what it meant, what it would cost her and what it had earned. Maya began breaking down her rifle, preparing for exfil. The radio traffic was still chaotic, but underneath it she could hear the change in tone. Respect, grudging or genuine, but respect nonetheless. She'd earned it the only way that mattered in this world, by making the shot when everything was on the line, when 240 lives depended on 2 seconds of perfection, when the only thing standing between disaster and survival was the woman they'd told to stay out of the way. Her hands moved with practiced efficiency, cleaning and securing her equipment. The sun was rising over Mosul now, painting the devastated city in shades of gold and red. Somewhere in that urban maze, SEALs were heading home who wouldn't have made it without her. They'd never thank her personally. That wasn't how this world worked, but they'd remember. And maybe, just maybe, the next time someone dismissed a woman in a briefing room, one of them would remember this morning and speak up. That was all she'd ever wanted. Not gratitude, not recognition, not medals that would get downgraded in administrative reviews. Just the chance to do the work she'd trained for, to be trusted with the hard shots, to prove that skill doesn't care about gender or politics or anyone's preconceived notions of who belongs where. She'd proven it. Now she had to live with the consequences of disobeying a direct order, of taking the shot when command had told her to stand down. But as she looked out over the city and thought about the men heading home to their families, she knew she'd make the same choice every time. Some shots you have to take. Some orders you have to break. Some moments define who you are and what you stand for. And no amount of career consequence changes that math. Maya had made her choice. And she'd made the shot. 3 days later, the FOB felt different. Or maybe Maya felt different in it. The mission after action review had been professional, clinical even, timelines discussed, decisions analyzed, outcomes documented. There'd been questions about her decision to engage without explicit authorization, but the questions had been perfunctory. Hard to reprimand someone for saving an operation when the drone footage and casualty count told the story better than any briefing slide could. No one was throwing her a parade. There was no dramatic promotion ceremony, no Medal of Honor presentation on the tarmac. Though she'd heard through Hendricks that paperwork was being filed somewhere up the chain, recommendations written by people who'd been in the TOC that morning and watched the impossible happen on their screens. Whether that paperwork would survive the bureaucratic journey or get quietly downgraded like the Navy Cross before it, well, that was a different question for a different day. But something had shifted in the small, daily interactions that made up life on a forward operating base. In the chow hall, when she walked past tables of SEALs eating breakfast, heads nodded in acknowledgement. Not the polite, obligatory nods you give to someone you're forced to tolerate, but the real thing, the recognition that passes between professionals who understand what it takes. In the TOC, when she offered input on Overwatch positions for the next operation, people actually listened, wrote down her coordinates, asked follow-up questions. The joke had stopped. The dismissive comments had evaporated like morning dew under the Iraqi sun. She found herself on a smoke break 2 days after the mission. She didn't actually smoke, but the designated area behind the Tactical Operations Building was one of the few quiet spots on the FOB where you could think. The SEAL platoon commander whose men had been pinned down in that kill zone found her there. He was in his mid-30s, beard regulation defiant in the way SEAL operators managed to get away with, eyes that had seen more combat than most people could imagine. He didn't say much. Operators rarely did when the moment actually mattered. He just walked up, reached into his pocket, and pulled out a patch, his unit's insignia, the one they wore on their kit downrange, the one that marked you as part of the team. He held it out to her. You earned this. 3 words. That was it. But in SEAL culture, in the world of quiet professionals who measured worth by actions rather than words, it was the equivalent of a standing ovation. Maya took the patch, felt the weight of it in her hand, not the physical weight, which was nothing, but what it represented. The respect she'd been fighting for since the day she arrived. The acknowledgement that she belonged. She nodded. He nodded back. The moment passed. No speeches, no dramatic declarations, no manufactured emotion. Just 2 professionals recognizing each other across the divide that separated them, and finding that maybe the divide had never been as wide as the paperwork suggested. But Maya knew the deeper truth, the reality that the patch in her hand couldn't change. She'd have to prove herself again. Next deployment, different unit, different faces, and she'd be back to square one. That was the reality for anyone breaking berries in a culture built on tradition and institutional memory that moved slower than glacier. One impossible shot didn't erase bias. It just cracked the door open a little wider. For the next woman who'd come after her. For the next outsider who didn't fit the expected mold. For the next attachment, who carried skills nobody expected until the moment those skills became the difference between catastrophe and survival. That evening, she found herself back on a rooftop, not the same one where she'd taken the shot, but similar enough. Rifle at her side, cleaning kit laid out, the ritual of maintenance that kept her grounded. The sun was setting over Mosul's devastated skyline, painting the rubble and broken buildings in shades of amber and gold that almost made you forget what had been lost there. The city had been beautiful once. Maybe it would be again, someday, when the fighting stopped and people could rebuild without wondering if tomorrow would bring more destruction. She thought about the different kinds of people who wore the uniform. There were those who wore their achievements like armor, loud, visible, demanding recognition for every accomplishment, building careers on the foundation of self-promotion and careful cultivation of their image. Nothing wrong with that, necessarily. The military needed people who could navigate the political landscape, who understood how to translate battlefield success into institutional advancement. But then there were the quiet professionals. The ones who didn't need applause because the work itself was enough. The ones who stayed ready in the shadows, who maintained their skills when no one was watching, who studied satellite imagery for weeks knowing that their input might never be heard. The ones who knew that when the impossible moment came, and it always did, eventually, they'd be the ones called to stand and deliver. Or the ones who'd step up even when nobody called, because that's what professionals did when lives were on the line. Maya had never wanted to be a symbol. She'd never set out to break barriers or prove points about gender integration or challenge the institutional culture of the Marine Corps and Naval Special Warfare. She just wanted to be trusted to do her job, to be given the same opportunities as anyone else with her qualifications and record, to be evaluated on her capability rather than dismissed because of assumptions about what women could or couldn't do in combat. The shot had proved she could deliver. But more importantly, it had proved something to 240 SEALs who'd lived it firsthand, who'd felt the shift when enemy coordination collapsed, who'd extracted their wounded through corridors that had been death traps minutes before. They'd carry that forward. Not all of them, maybe. Not universally or permanently. But some of them, in the next briefing room when someone dismissed input from an unexpected source, might remember the morning when the quiet professional they'd sidelined made the shot that changed everything. That was enough. It had to be. Maybe you're watching this from somewhere comfortable, somewhere far from the sound of gunfire and the weight of impossible decisions. Or maybe you're watching it in uniform, between shifts, recognizing the story because you've lived some version of it yourself. Wherever you are, maybe you've been underestimated too. Maybe you've watched someone prove the doubters wrong, seen the quiet professional step up when the loud voices fell silent. If you have a story like that, drop it in the comments. The world needs more reminders that capability doesn't always announce itself with fanfare. Maya stayed on that rooftop until the last light faded from the sky and Mosul disappeared into darkness punctuated by scattered lights, generator-powered, fragile, temporary illumination in a city learning to live again. She packed up her cleaning kit, secured her rifle, and headed back to her quarters. Tomorrow there'd be another brief, another mission, another opportunity to prove she belonged or another reminder that the fight for respect never really ended. But tonight, she had a SEAL unit patch in her pocket and the memory of a shot that had mattered. In a career full of small victories and grinding setbacks, that was something worth holding on to. In the end, the battlefield doesn't care about politics or bias, doesn't care about institutional resistance or bureaucratic inertia. It doesn't care about the arguments that happen in air-conditioned offices thousands of miles from the sound of gunfire. The battlefield only recognizes one thing: the professional who can make the shot when it matters most. Everything else is just noise. Maya Reeves had made the shot, and 240 SEALs had gone home because of it. That was the only measure that mattered.